don't be afraid to build your honors college model after your specific student demographic and profile. So your honors college does not have to look like some of the national models at other really well-established schools if you don't have the same strengths, same priorities, same resources. It doesn't have to be what everyone else is doing.
That was Sarah Holtan, Associate Dean of Arts and Sciences at Carroll University and host of the fantastic Get Down to College Business podcast. We had a great conversation about honors programs and living learning communities. We touched on how to make them unique, how to scale them to your resources, and how to strike the careful balance between giving people what they want versus what's best for their development as you implement these kinds of high-impact practices. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Connected College podcast. I'm your host, Elliot Felix. I've helped more than 100 colleges and universities change what they offer, how they operate, and how they're organized to enable student success. And if you're a leader in higher ed and you think that the silos and separations get in the way of student success, then this podcast and my upcoming book, The Connected College, are for you. We're here to learn and work together to bust silos, question tradition, and forge partnerships so that students feel connected to their college, their community, their coursework, and their careers.
Welcome, Sarah. I'm so excited for our conversation.
Thanks, Elliot, for having me today. I'm thrilled to be here.
I think a great place to get started is learning how you did. How did you get started in higher ed?
Elliot, I wasn't supposed to be in higher ed. I was supposed to be a political reporter in Washington, D.C., which is what I went to college for way back in the 90s. And I think I made a good choice and ended up in higher ed after spending my first career as a television news producer. I worked at the ABC affiliate in Milwaukee for several years, producing live television news. And like so many people who are in that industry, you burn out. And at some point, you physically can't take it anymore. The hours, the pace, you're broke all the time because you don't make any money. And you don't feel maybe the same purpose that you had hoped you would feel when you were starting out in the career. And so routine burnout led me to start working on my master's degree. And the seed was planted that, well, maybe I don't want to be a practitioner of news anymore, but I could certainly teach it to others. I could turn around and take what I learned in the newsroom and become a journalism educator at the college level.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, it explains a lot. If you work with me, it would explain a lot why sometimes my pace is a little accelerated.
I was going to say, you probably crush your deadlines, like pulling things together live is no problem.
I take pride in meeting deadlines. So my pace is a little bit faster than maybe some people are used to, but I try to work it as a advantage. And then right when I was finishing my master's, somebody I knew was looking to fill a position in the communication department, which was perfect because that was my background. I started focusing on journalism and journalism courses when I started working full-time as a professor. And I did that for a number of years, loved it. And then I ended up shifting over into academic administration. I was asked to take on Dean of Students role, which didn't see that one coming either. But I was asked to take that on in part because while I was a strong classroom teacher, I was also like faculty advisor for half the extracurriculars on campus. And I believe the president was hoping that academics and student life would be more bridged together and that we would break down that silo and be more connected. And that how do we assess what we're doing in student life? And so I think I was seen as the person that could help make that happen. And so then I became vice president of student life as well. And then I ended up going back to full-time faculty. And now I'm back in an academic administration as associate dean of arts and sciences. And I oversee our general education program as well as our honors program.
That's awesome. It sounds like you're such a natural connector, right? You're connecting the coursework and the classroom to the career and helping leverage your experience in that. And then you're connecting student affairs and academic affairs and bridging those two. That's really fantastic. And those kind of connections are what I see as critical to student success. And I would love to hear your definition of student success. Is it connecting those things? How do you define it?
You'll probably guess that I'm not going to give you one simple answer because I tend to see
Yeah.
things a little bit more connected
Yes.
or
It turns out hard
complicated.
problems have nuanced answers.
Yeah.
Right?
So if you don't mind, I'm going to answer this on 3
Please.
different levels. All right. So I'm going to give you the macro answer. So how would we define student success? I think the established metrics are in place for a reason. So when we think about retention, completion, graduation rates, when we think about job placement rates, student satisfaction with services, and even student engagement, right? All of those traditional metrics are important, and we absolutely should monitor them and know where our own university stands in relation to our national peers and work toward better outcomes. Absolutely. But I also want to define it on the micro level. So when I think about like where we sit in the university, our definition of student success changes. So right now I'm working with honor students in the general education program. So that's my daily work. Every day I'm in the trenches. I have administrative oversight of both. I see the problems. The problems end up in my lap. They end up in our email box, right? They end up and we see, okay, here's what's not working. And so when I think about what isn't working or what is working, when I hear students talk about, oh, we had this great programming in our honors building last year, and we want to do something like that again. And I just hear about it from their own individual level. I think, oh, that was something that was memorable to them. And that speaks to me on that micro level where maybe I couldn't put that in my accreditation report. Maybe it's not something, the kind of story or anecdote that would really rise up to the top leadership level, but it mattered to those students and I heard about it. And so for that, even one student or a group of students, something happened that made them feel more engaged and positive and affirmed and enriched. And so I think about it on that level. And then the third level, because I loved my college experience, I cannot help but think about it on my own personal level. I think about student success for me had so much to do with my own sense of belonging, which really I attribute to my lifelong friends. The friends I made the first year of college are still among my best friends. And not that we get to see each other that often, but when we do, we have the same stories, the same jokes, it's the same energy, it's the same level of friendship. And that's those bonds that I developed in college always have stayed with me as being some of the most important growth moments of how much I learned from my friends and kind of how much I got out of being in that community. So I think about how I would like that to translate for the students in our own campuses now. Do they have that friend group that they're always going to have on their Christmas card list and invite to their weddings and chat with every so often and see at reunions and having that, okay, that's during my most developmental phase of my life, those were the people that stood by me, even though I was weird and quirky and probably not as funny as I thought I was, and
Weird is
all
good.
of those things. So just having that really strong connection to other peers, I think is how, for me, that's the biggest thing that I point to with my own college experience.
I think that's a great set of definitions. I think you need those macro metrics, but you also need the memorable experiences and you need to feel like you're part of something. I think that's really great. And I would love to dig into honors programs more specifically as they relate to that. One of the higher ed innovators that I interviewed for my Connected College book talked about belonging as making a big place feel small. This is Dan Maxwell. I feel like honors programs are a great way to do that, creating this best of both worlds experience for students where you have everything that a larger institution has to offer, but you have a small, close-knit community. I would love to hear your take on honors programs.
Yeah, Elliot, that's exactly how I describe the honors program at Carroll University, which is the best of both worlds. We have the really strong academic foundation, which is the pillar of what we do, but ours is also a living learning community. And so our first year students live together in residential campus housing. And so we bring in all the other pieces. So their community, their res life experience. We do programming. We actually have a dedicated residence hall for them, which is fantastic.
Wow.
And I know it's its own separate entity and it's all honors. And I think that's one of the things that does make it special is that the physical setup absolutely reflects the idea that we're here to build community together. So we can bring that bigger campus smaller, as you mentioned. So the first year friends that you make are built in. And especially for some students where maybe making new friendships at a new place where you don't know anybody is maybe daunting for some. And so here it provides that kind of safe enclave for making these friendships in a natural way. You're living and learning with them. Our honors students take classes together, and then they also do programming together. We have a leadership council. We call it the Honors Council, which is all student-led. So they have leadership training, but all their meetings are right there in the residence hall. And we have public spaces, 2 kitchens, recreational space. And then we have the private residential area, which is in the building, but kind of locked off. So people can come and go in the public space, but their private space is still their private space. And it just works out really well to bring all of that together in one place.
That's really great. I love adding the living learning community component because then you've got the people and the programming and the place, and they're all working together. And whether it's helping people meet friends and get that sense of community, sense of belonging in the first year, or building those relationships, that sounds really great. I know one of the tips in how to get the most out of college is about living learning communities. And there was, I think one study found a 5% retention, 5 percentage point retention bump. Another found that students in living learning communities had closer relationships with faculty, that their peer network was more diverse. They knew people that were different than them. And I think there was another one about taking more risks. Are those the kinds of things in yours? What are some of the other benefits that you're seeing from that community?
Definitely. Yeah, absolutely. You named several of them. Our retention is a bit higher than the rest of our campus. And usually if we don't retain a student, we know why. I think that sometimes at colleges, if you're losing 30% of your class between the first year and the second year, a lot of times you don't always know why some of those students left. We typically know, and it typically is outside of our control for any number of reasons. So we do have a high retention rate. We're very lucky that we have a defined space. I know that's not possible in all campuses. We're lucky. We intentionally, strategically went about that. We have a very generous donor that helps fund our programming and our housing. And so that helps tremendously to protect that space. But just having it visible on campus is another thing that I don't know if everyone would think of as sometimes the honors college is easy to overlook because it's just a set of courses that students might take if they were accepted into this program, but you don't see necessarily what they do or what they're about. But we open our programming to non-honors students, and because we have a nice hall and dedicated space that has some greater visibility on campus. But yeah, I would just say that in addition to some of the benefits that you mentioned, and also just living learning communities in and of themselves are established high impact practice.
Right.
So the more high impact practices that we can do, our students are better off for those. Yeah. And ours have access to faculty. I think you mentioned that, but I'll just echo that. Our students have access to faculty because of our smaller class sizes for the honors courses. So you do have more relationships. So we see our students engage in more of our original research projects that we offer over the summer because
another high impact practice.
Exactly. Double down. It's one of those that builds on each other. You're working with honors faculty in a small class, and now you're identified as having potential for this original research project. Now you have a faculty mentor who's sponsoring and signing on to this project in summer. Now you've got original research under your belt. So you're in really good position to do either graduate school work or a conference presentation.
That's great. It's the space, but it's also a symbol, and it's the curriculum, but it's also the community. It's just bringing so many different things together. I have one maybe in the weeds question, which is Talk to me a little bit about the design of this living learning community in the residence hall. Are the rooms along a hallway, or are they suites, or are they apartments?
Okay, great. Let me give you the visual picture. So when you first walk in, the first level is all public space.
Mhm.
And you walk in, and to your right, there's a nice kitchen, which we stock with. This is like the students' favorite perk, I think, is all the free coffee and hot chocolate that they can drink.
Nice.
And so some students use it for lounge. And then we have I'll call it a conference room because it has its own printer, which is also very exciting.
Nice.
Bathroom. So they basically have meeting space, collaboration space. And then if you walked in and you went straight ahead, there's this big open multi-purpose room, and that's where they do a lot of programming classes, some of the bigger meetings. We ordered whiteboards, and so there's big long whiteboards, and so you'll see all sorts of announcements there. So it's like an easy way to communicate with everyone. I know they use it sometimes for like brainstorming and sessions. There's bookcases, there's long windows, and actually the doors open, and there's a patio that overlooks the outside area.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really cute. And so in the nice weather, which we're in Wisconsin, so it's not that often, but in nice weather, they can open it up and let some fresh air in. If you walked in the front doors and went through the kind of locked private residential area, you would then have 3 floors. And those each have, I want to say, between 10 to 12 rooms. They're not suites. And so they have communal bathrooms and individual rooms. And so it's either 1 or 2 students per room. And then the basement is just like an open rec area, another kitchen, bathroom,
Cool.
and some other functional places, but another whiteboard because they like to do, that stuff. Oh, and a piano. I'm not sure how we
Nice.
acquired
Gotta have a piano.
Must have been a gift at some point. We have some music students who love to play it. So yeah,
That's
so it's
awesome.
actually really great. And they get their own parking. There's a lot of perks when you have your own space. So they have their own parking right next to the building, and they're more or less located near some of the other big campus services, such as the library and our main dining hall. So I think a lot of first-year students who are using the main dining hall and some of the other campus support services really appreciate just like being a half block or a block away.
Nice. Part of the reason I was interested in the residence hall layout is there's a bunch of studies about room configurations, and it turns out that rooms along a hallway create a quote-unquote socializing architecture. It actually, it's a nudge. It's like a behavioral economics nudge to get out and talk to people that suites and apartments don't have. And one study found 22% more interaction when you have those the way you have it, and a greater sense of community, and also even slightly higher GPAs.
Oh, that's interesting. Now that
Yeah.
you say it, it makes sense intuitively, but I'm not sure I
Yeah.
thought about it quite to that degree. So that's interesting information. So important that you just put yourself out there.
Yeah.
Knock on somebody's door. Hey, you want to watch TV? You want to study together? You want to go for a meal? I think that's so important. It does force you to just do it.
There's that like sweet spot about hard stuff is good for you. And I always think about, there was this famous or maybe even infamous case study with Walmart, maybe 10, maybe even more years ago, where they had low in-store satisfaction, customer satisfaction. So they did all this research, and they found out like the big issue was clutter. People found that there was just so much on the shelf. It was too cluttered, couldn't find what they needed. So they revamped all these things, and they made everything like clean and less cluttered. Satisfaction went up, and then the holiday season came, and they lost $1 billion in sales because it turned out clutter was really good for people buying more stuff. So I just always think sometimes customer satisfaction actually doesn't lead to the outcome you're looking for.
And indirectly, I think it speaks to the fact that we don't always know what we want.
Yeah,
and unpredictable. We said
having
we wanted this because we thought we did, and it turns out we actually don't want that.
Yeah, there's that too. So you might not know what you want. The thing you want might not actually be good for your own personal development. I think it's a fine line, and it's the more we think about students as consumers and customers, it gets to be a slippery slope, I think, because they most certainly are. And when we shifted the burden of tuition from the state to the student, there was, of course, They're going to think about their customers, but sometimes it's not just about satisfaction, right? It's about growth and engagement and all the things belonging and all the things you mentioned. And it's this careful mix of giving people what they want versus what might create the best experience for them. We've talked a lot about what honors programs, living learning communities, what these are today and what the benefits are. How are these changing in the future? Are there things that are making these better, worse, harder, easier? What's on the horizon for honors colleges or honors programs?
Yeah, I think that's the type of question that all units in higher ed are considering. I don't think any of our changes for honors will be unique to honors. Higher ed is facing disruption. And we all know this. We feel it at different levels. And so the pressures that any college campus is facing, especially one that maybe has limited resources or is not able to grow right now, those are the same things that we're going to face. And pulling it back to honors, I see the biggest challenge is just finding room for growth to suit wherever the next cohort of students wants to go, because not every cohort of students wants the same things. They might have different priorities, different expectations, different goals for that program. But keeping up with that, with the reality of we may not have more budget funding than we currently have, or we might have shrinking budgets in the future. And so how do you maintain or grow if your resources can't be scaled to match change?
So if it's seen as a special program, maybe there's less funding for it.
Exactly. And I mentioned earlier that we have a generous donor that allows a lot of what we do, but then we also have institutional operational budgets. And that's the pot that I always am mindful of. That's variable. No one will ever guarantee that you get exactly what you had. But those are the same issues that everybody's facing in every unit. So I don't know if we have anything that would be unique to honors other than just what's the next generation going to want. It's been community. We've heard that theme of students wanting to build community and being enriched academically, that combination. And so we've been really fostering that on our campus. But what if in 3 to 5 years it looks different for that next generation? Trying to keep up with them is always a challenge.
I feel like there's a kind of like a societal backlash against things that are perceived as elite, which doesn't quite make sense to me. And someone will want the most elite athlete on the sports team they cheer for, but then the idea that like someone goes to the best college or the best program within that college is somehow inadvisable or undesirable. Is there any risk of backlash against honors programs as selective and diverting resources from the rest of the college?
I'm sure there's some people who feel that way. They're much too polite to say it to my face, so I can't say that I've ever actually heard that. The other thing that might be unique about our campus is that while we have the academic pillar for our program, as all honors colleges do, we actually don't recruit or enforce academics with the same type of standards that some colleges do. So, for example, when we're recruiting for the honors program, they don't have to have a certain GPA or any standardized test score that demonstrates like an 3.85 or anything like that. It's not like that. We don't have it set up like that. Everybody who's accepted into Carroll is allowed to apply. Now, we do have a pretty rigorous application program. They have to submit an essay. They have to do an interview with our team. And so we do look at their whole person, but it's not based on a GPA or a test score. So that's, I think, one difference.
Much more holistic, yeah.
Yes. And we're looking for really intellectually curious people. And how do you want to give back to your society?
Yeah.
What does it look like for you to be an honors student? If it means that you just want something on your resume so you can get into a grad school, or you take pride in being an overachiever, that's great, but that's not us. And so we look at all kinds of things, but we don't have an extra layer of GPA on top of that. And so I think that also allows students to maybe take, like you said earlier, one of the benefits of taking risks, like maybe take a class that's really hard for you, but that you really wanted to take. I think some students protect their GPA and never take a class that will personally challenge them to the point where they might risk a C.
where
They
you end
love
up
that.
with like
Yeah.
perverse incentives to,
Yeah.
if I want to stay in the honors college, I can't be intellectually curious because I can't take
Right.
something that I'm not good at. I appreciate the holistic approach you're taking. And it also reminds me there's lots of cases where sometimes the barriers to change, especially things that would be helpful to students, can be students themselves. Active learning classrooms and more interactive ways of teaching, I think, are a very popular example where, let's say you have a professor that instead of lecturing for 45 minutes and then taking 5 minutes of questions, wants to talk a little bit in the beginning, break people up into groups, give them a problem to work on, report out their solution. The students that are usually the most resistant to that are usually the top students that have optimized for the lecture rinse and repeat model. So the idea that now they're going to break up into groups, they have to work with other people. They're
So
not doing,
messy. Other
yeah,
people are messy, man.
and they're not
I don't
doing
know
the
what.
thing they got so good at.
Tell me what I need to know for the test. Like, is this
Exactly.
on the test? Is this on the
Yeah.
test? Like, I just memorize this stuff and then I'm good. Great. Awesome.
And
Neat and
so,
tidy. It lacks, it
yeah,
lacks the ambiguity of working with other people and having to weigh multiple perspectives and still find how to evaluate the topic at hand. So,
yeah.
agreed.
And if you're at the top, there's nowhere to go but down, right? Is the false perception. And so I love the idea that you're thinking about this holistically so that you can encourage students to take risks, to be curious, to work together. That's really great. And if the sort of the challenges facing or the changes facing honors programs aren't that distinct from the challenges facing higher ed writ large, what's your advice to someone who's running one of these programs or running a living learning community at a college or university to cope with these changes and to increase student success?
I'd say, just building on what we've been talking about, is don't be afraid to build your honors college model after your specific student demographic and profile. So your honors college does not have to look like some of the national models at other really well-established schools if you don't have the same strengths, same priorities, same resources. A lot of times good ideas come down to being able to resource them adequately. So what could an honors college look like at your school, whether you're established or not, or looking to start an honors college? It doesn't have to be what everyone else is doing. I think at Carroll, we do ours a little bit differently. And I think that's one of our strengths. I think that's why we pull in the type of student and we give them the experience that is best suited for them, that we can deliver well. And so just not being afraid to break the mold. Maybe you've been doing it one way and you're like, gosh, the students aren't really that engaged. We don't really see them beyond a required meeting or two. Like, how do we get them more participatory? So maybe it means going back to the drawing board and looking at what would suit your campus and your students' needs and priorities best. The other thing I would say is really look at the infrastructure and your policies. That is something that with any, you called it a special program, which is as good of a term as I can think of, like with any of those, they do need dedicated resources. And if you're not willing to, or you just can't, then I don't know, you might just end up spinning your wheels, because I think the infrastructure and the resources scaled appropriately are so important, because those students join on. And let me tell you, honor students, they know how to reach you. They know how to fill out all the forms.
Very proactive. Yeah.
They know how to find you in your office. They know how to put together a spreadsheet that will make you proud and say, here are the things we need, and here's how we'd like it done, and here's our deadlines, and here's our expectations. These are not students who are just
That's
like,
awesome.
that was good enough. They know what they're doing. I joke. So the president of our honors council right now, she's a junior. I joke, I'm like, she might be my boss someday. I hope I'm giving her good leadership lessons. Like, I swear she's probably going to be my boss someday. She probably could be my boss now. These are go-getter, high initiative, highly intrinsically motivated students. So to try to shortchange them or shortcut them on the things that are needed to execute the program well, they're going to sniff that out in a fast minute. So don't try and do it poorly.
Yeah.
Do what you can and do it well with what resources you do have available.
Yeah, that what I'm taking away from that, other than the inspiration about the next generation, which is great. I love those stories, is just get that quantity quality balance right. If you try and do too much stuff for too many people, you might not be able to deliver at the kind of quality that really makes the impact that you're seeking. Then you're diluting the high impact practice. And so you really have to get that balance right.
Yeah, that's a good way of phrasing it. Quantity and quality, the balance. Yeah, for sure.
Sarah, thank you so much for your insights about how higher ed is changing and how honors colleges enable student success and the role that they play as living learning communities. I think it's so great to take this deep dive into something that has such amazing impact. Really want to thank you for that.
No, thank you for allowing me to share the fun part of my job. I always say honors is the best part of my job. The students are just tremendous. They have limitless potential, and it's an honor really to work with them. Thank you, Elliot.
You're quite welcome. I also want to thank you for your Getting Down to College Business podcast, because I think earlier you were talking about the challenges facing higher ed. I think you have such great discussions on there, digging into those challenges and offering practical advice and examples. And I think it's a real service to our community and a lot of fun too. So thank you for that as well.
Yeah, appreciate the recognition for that, Elliot.
Thanks for listening to the Connected College podcast. Subscribe to my Connected College newsletter at elliottfelix.com for insights and excerpts from my upcoming book, tools you can download, and special offers. You can also find more information about talks I've given, articles I've written, and upcoming events there. And please support the podcast by rating and reviewing it wherever you're listening. Let's create connected colleges where students will succeed.